Burmese pythons have devastated native wildlife in the Everglades.
Deep in Florida's swamps, cameras are capturing an aftermath that's baffling scientists. For decades, we've only heard about the invasion, the complete takeover by giant pythons. But recent footage shows something new. It reveals a hidden consequence nobody saw coming and a desperate gamble that was laughed at by the entire world. The pythons are still here, but they are no longer the only story. What's been found in the Everglades isn't just an apocalypse. It's a shocking, unexpected twist that changes everything we thought we knew about this broken paradise. Florida's great mistake. Long before the chaos, the Florida Everglades was a living, breathing miracle. It wasn't just a swamp, it was a vast, slow-moving river of grass stretching over 1.5 million acres. This was an ancient, complex system, a subtropical wilderness that pulsed with life. It was so important that its value was estimated at over $31.5 billion every single year. You see, it wasn't just home to alligators and birds, it provided flood protection and clean drinking water for millions of people in South Florida. Life here moved in a perfect, delicate balance. Huge flocks of wading birds, herons, egrets, and ibis would cover the sky, so many that they looked like clouds. Raccoons, opossums, and marsh rabbits scurried through the sawgrass. And bobcats and native foxes stalked the edges of the tree islands called hammocks. It was one of the last truly wild places, and nobody, not even the experts, imagined it could unravel so fast. This whole nightmare didn't start with a bang. It started with a whisper. A storm. In August of 1992, Hurricane Andrew, a monster Category 5 storm, tore through southern Florida. The winds were screaming at over 165 miles per hour. It flattened entire neighborhoods, and in the chaos, it ripped apart a reptile breeding facility near Miami. When the winds finally died down, an unknown number of Burmese pythons, a species native to Southeast Asia, had slipped away into the wetlands. But here's the deal. That storm wasn't the only problem. At the exact same time, a slower disaster was unfolding. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Burmese pythons were the hot new exotic pet. People bought them as tiny $10 snakes, thinking they were cool. But here's the catch. Those cool snakes don't stay small. They grow, and they grow fast. A snake that fits in your hand becomes a 10-foot, 50-pound monster in just a few years. And they don't stop. They can get over 20 feet long and weigh over 200 pounds, heavy enough to take down a full-grown deer. Overwhelmed pet owners, who were now stuck with a giant, dangerous predator, did the only thing they could think of. They drove to the edge of the Everglades and just let them go. They thought they were setting them free. Instead, they were lighting a fuse on an ecological time bomb. Now, this is the story everyone's been told. But here's a wilder thought. What if the pet owner story is just the easy excuse? What if the hurricane didn't just break a facility, but the facility? A massive, undocumented breeding operation that flooded the swamp with thousands of snakes all at once. Some researchers have whispered that the sheer speed of the invasion doesn't add up with just a few scattered pet releases. It's a mystery that's never been solved. For years, nobody paid much attention. A few sightings here and there were just curiosities. But the pythons weren't just surviving, they were thriving. You see, the Everglades was a perfect storm of opportunity for them. It was a python's paradise. The heat, the humidity, the endless shallow water, and a massive all-you-can-eat buffet of native animals. Animals that had zero natural defenses. They had never in their entire evolutionary history faced a predator like this. The Burmese python is a monster of engineering. They are masters of camouflage, vanishing into the grass. They can hold their breath underwater for over 30 minutes. And the craziest part? They have thermal sensing pits along their jaws. They can literally see the body heat of a warm-blooded mammal in total darkness. A raccoon doesn't stand a chance. And then there's the breeding. Oh, the breeding. A single female can lay a clutch of up to 100 eggs. With no natural predators to keep them in check, their population went vertical. Today, experts estimate there are anywhere from 100,000 to over 300,000 pythons slithering through South Florida. And the paradise that was once bursting with life is now falling silent. The numbers are so bad they sound fake. A landmark study from 2012 revealed the horrifying truth. In the hardest hit areas of the Everglades, raccoon populations have dropped by 99.3%. Opossums are down 98.9%, and bobcats have fallen by 87.5%. Think about that. Not 10%, not 50%, 99%. Gone, erased. What most people don't realize is what this feels like. Biologists and hunters who have worked in the Everglades for decades talk about the silence. They remember driving down the loop roads and having to stop for raccoons or turtles. Now they see nothing for miles, for days. The small mammals that form the entire foundation of the food web have been vacuumed up. The invaders had found heaven and they were consuming it whole. The balance that held the Everglades together for thousands of years wasn't just broken, it was shattered. And as officials finally woke up to the crisis, they realized they were fighting a ghost. The swamp was silent, but the pythons hadn't come alone. The unwinnable war. As the silence in the Everglades became deafening, the state of Florida finally had to act. But their response at first looked like something out of a cheap reality TV show. In 2013, officials launched the Florida Python Challenge. It was part publicity stunt, part desperate lottery ticket. They invited the public, basically anyone brave enough or crazy enough, to wade into the swamp and hunt the giant invaders. They offered cash prizes, including a $10,000 grand prize for the person who removed the most snakes. It became an annual spectacle. By 2024, over 800 people from all over the country and even Canada showed up. They were armed with traps, snake hooks, and nerves of steel, ready to do what decades of policy couldn't. That year, they captured 195 Burmese pythons. The headlines were great. The photos were dramatic. It felt like a victory. But here's the deal. Let's do the math. They removed 195 snakes. A year later, in 2025, they broke a new record. 294 snakes. This sounds huge, right? Yeah, about that. Let's be generous and take the lowest possible estimate. 100,000 pythons in the wild. Removing 294 of them is less than 0.3% of the population. If the real number is closer to 300,000, the impact is statistically zero. It's like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon while the tide is coming in. The Everglades wasn't healing. It was just a backdrop for a hunting competition, and the pythons were outbreeding the bullets. So the state got more serious. They brought in professionals. The South Florida Water Management District hired 24 elite, paid hunters. These weren't weekend adventurers. These were career python chasers, paid an hourly wage to stalk the levees and swamps day and night, year-round. Since 2017, these contractors have removed thousands of pythons. Combined with all other efforts, state, federal, and private, over 23,000 pythons have been taken out of the wild. It sounds impressive. It is impressive. But even that massive number, the result of years of dedicated work, is likely less than 5% of the total population. For every one snake they find, 20 more hatch hidden in the endless sawgrass. Frustrated, Florida turned to high-tech warfare. If they couldn't find them on the ground, they'd find them from the air. They launched drones equipped with high-resolution thermal cameras, thinking they could spot the snake's heat signatures from above. But there was a problem. The Everglades is hot, the ground is hot, the water is hot, and pythons are cold-blooded. They are masters at regulating their body temperature to match their surroundings. To a thermal camera, a resting python looks just like a warm rock or a patch of mud. Plus, the thick canopy of trees and mangroves makes spotting anything almost impossible. The drones were a bust. Then they tried robot rabbits. Engineers designed fake rabbits that gave off heat and made sounds, trying to lure the pythons into an ambush. It failed. Pythons are ambush predators. They wait perfectly still for real prey to cross their path. They weren't interested in noisy, clunky robots. The most successful sounding idea involved using scout snakes, also called Judas snakes. This one was clever. Researchers would capture a large male python, surgically implant a tiny radio transmitter, and then release it right back into the wild during mating season. The male, driven by instinct, would, in theory, lead them right to a giant egg-filled female. This program has worked. It has led to the removal of some of the biggest, most productive breeding females. But it's incredibly slow. It's incredibly expensive, and it's a game of inches in a war that needs miles. And here's the wildest theory of all. What if the snakes are just too smart? The hunters and biologists who are out there every day, they talk about it, they say it's uncanny. The snakes seem to know where the traps are. They avoid the levees where the hunters walk. The Judas snakes sometimes lead researchers on bizarre circular chases for months, almost as if they know they're being followed. Is it possible that an apex predator, when introduced into a new environment with no threats, can evolve a new kind of intelligence? A new level of cunning? It's a terrifying thought. The tech was failing. The hunters were outmatched. The frustration was thick. Years of effort, billions of dollars in funding, and an endless list of failed experiments all pointed to the same sobering truth. The pythons had won. Scientists began to admit it publicly. Full eradication is impossible. The best anyone can do is control them. These predators had claimed the Everglades as their own, and no amount of human technology could take it back. But the real enemy wasn't the one they could see. The enemy within. This is where the story and the real aftermath takes a dark, unexpected turn. What if Florida's biggest problem wasn't the 20-foot python everyone was hunting, but something microscopic that nobody even knew was there? Deep in the Everglades, a silent passenger arrived with the invaders. It was an unseen parasite, a twisted gift from the pythons, and it's now rewriting Florida's ecological story in the most gruesome way. Its name is Racilotilo orientalis. It's better known as the snake lungworm. Scientists first stumbled onto this threat during necropsies of native Florida snakes. They were finding native species, garter snakes, pygmy rattlesnakes, water snakes that were emaciated. They were weak, struggling to breathe. When they opened them up, they found a horror show. Their lungs and airways were clogged with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of tiny, writhing worms. They quickly traced the source. This lungworm originally comes from Asia, the native home of the Burmese python. Over thousands of years, the pythons and this parasite co-evolved. The pythons can carry the lungworm, but it rarely causes them serious harm. They're used to it, they have defenses. But Florida's native snakes, they have zero natural defense. It's a brand new alien enemy. And here's the deal on how this new plague spreads. The life cycle is terrifyingly simple. 1. An infected python poops in the swamp. 2. Those droppings contain the lungworm's eggs. 3. Cockroaches and other insects feed on the waste, and the eggs hatch inside them. 4. Lizards and frogs eat those infected insects. 5. Finally, a native Florida snake eats that infected frog or lizard. Once inside the snake's body, the larvae begin their journey. They don't stay in the stomach. They tunnel through the stomach wall and migrate directly into the lungs. There they grow, they feed on blood and tissue, and they reproduce. They clog the snake's airways until it can't breathe. For many native snakes, this infection is a brutal, slow-motion ending. They become too weak to hunt. They slowly starve, all while suffocating. Researchers have found native snakes with severe pneumonia and open bleeding lesions in their lungs. In some of the worst cases, they found snakes with dozens of these worms literally crawling out of their mouths as they gasped for their last breath. This is the real, unexpected aftermath. The pythons were the first wave. They ended the mammals. This parasite is the second wave, and it's here to end the native reptiles. The real shock came when scientists discovered how far the lungworm had already spread. It's not just in the Everglades anymore. At least 18 different native snake species in Florida have already been found to be infected. The parasite's reach now stretches through dozens of counties. Some reports say it's as far north as Jacksonville and even creeping toward the Panhandle. And get this is the part that has scientists terrified. The pythons may have started this, but the lungworm doesn't need them anymore. It has successfully jumped ship. It has established itself in native hosts and is now spreading all on its own, moving from native snake to native snake. So here's the crazy part. Even if, by some miracle, every single Burmese python was removed from Florida tomorrow, the lungworm would remain. It is here. It is alive, and it is thriving. When native snakes, a key part of the food web, start to vanish, the balance collapses all over again. Rodents and other pests multiply. Larger predators that eat snakes, like hawks and eagles, lose their food source. Now here's where the wild theories come in. First, is this parasite mutating? It already made the jump from an Asian host to dozens of North American hosts. What's to stop it from jumping again? This leads to the scariest question of all. Could it jump to mammals or even humans? Researchers say it's highly unlikely. But here's the catch. They didn't think it could jump from pythons to native garter snakes either. But it did. What happens if a stray dog eats an infected frog? What happens to a hunter who handles an infected snake? Right now they say we're safe. But in a world where this thing is adapting by the minute, safe is a very strong word. There is, however, one very strange twist. The Florida cottonmouth, a native pit viper, seems to be highly resistant to the parasite. No one knows why. Is it something in their genetics, their diet? This mystery has its own theory. What if the cottonmouth is the key? What if its blood holds the secret to an anti-parasite, a cure? What began as a battle against a giant visible monster has turned into a war against an invisible microscopic one. There is no cure, there is no treatment, and there is no way to stop it. A monster they couldn't see was wiping out the survivors. Florida was out of options, so they turned to a plan. So crazy, the entire world laughed out loud. A desperate gamble. With the python invasion completely out of control and a new invisible parasite plague spreading like wildfire, Florida was beyond desperate. The state was a global punchline. The ecosystem was on life support, and that's when officials announced the plan. When the news broke, it sounded like a joke. It sounded like something straight out of a late-night comedy sketch or a Florida Man headline. Florida officials announced they were releasing hundreds of more snakes into the wild to help fight the invasive python crisis. The world absolutely lost it. Social media exploded. Doesn't Florida have enough snakes already? Fighting snakes with more snakes? What could possibly go wrong? The mockery was instant. People immediately compared it to the great ecological blunders of history. They brought up the cane toads, which were released in Australia in the 1930s to control beetles. The toads ignored the beetles, multiplied into the billions, and became a toxic plague that is still devastating Australia's wildlife. They brought up the mongooses. In the 1880s, mongooses were brought to Hawaii to control rats in sugarcane fields. But here's the catch. The rats are nocturnal, and the mongooses are active during the day. They rarely even met. So the mongooses went looking for other food and ended up wiping out Hawaii's native ground-nesting birds. This, everyone screamed, was the exact same mistake. Another case of humans trying to play God and making things 1,000 times worse. News outlets ran headlines that made it sound like a bad sci-fi movie. Anxious residents wondered if their pets and children were safe. To the average person, it felt absurd, a plan doomed to fail before it even started. But here's the deal. This wasn't a Florida Man idea, and this wasn't just any snake. Behind the laughter and the headlines, scientists had been quietly working for decades on a desperate, brilliant plan. The snake they were releasing was the eastern indigo snake, and it wasn't an invader, it was the rightful king returning to reclaim its throne. The eastern indigo snake is known as the emperor of the forest, and for good reason. It is the longest native snake in all of North America, a powerful, non-venomous predator that can grow up to 9 feet long. Its scales are a stunning iridescent blue-black that shimmer in the sun with a patch of reddish-orange coral color under its chin. But its beauty isn't what makes it special. Its diet is what makes it a legend. The eastern indigo is what's known as an ophiophagus. That means it eats other snakes. And get this, it is completely immune to the venom of North America's pit vipers, rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, copperheads. The indigo eats them all. It doesn't constrict its prey. It just pins them down with its powerful jaws and swallows them alive, completely unshaken by the struggle. It is basically the boss of the forest floor. Its kingdom, however, used to be vast, stretching from South Carolina through Georgia and Florida and west to Mississippi. But that kingdom crumbled. The indigo snake's fate is tied to two things: longleaf pine forests and gopher tortoises. First, the forests. The snake thrived in the ancient longleaf pine ecosystem, a habitat that once covered nearly 90 million acres of the southeast. Today, because of logging, development, and fire suppression, nearly 97% of that original forest is gone. Second, the tortoise. The eastern indigo snake doesn't dig its own burrows. It relies almost entirely on the deep, sandy burrows dug by the gopher tortoise. These burrows are like underground apartment complexes, offering shelter from fire and cold. Over 350 other species also depend on these burrows. The gopher tortoise is what's called a keystone species. The entire ecosystem is built around it. As the longleaf pines were cut down and the tortoises were hunted or displaced, the indigo snake vanished. During the Great Depression, people dug up tortoises for food and would dispatch any snakes they found hiding inside. By 1978, the eastern indigo snake was listed as a threatened species. It was completely wiped out from Alabama and North Florida. So here's the deal. The laughable plan wasn't about adding a new snake, it was about restoring a native apex predator that humans had already wiped out. For decades, a coalition of conservation groups and state agencies had been painstakingly breeding indigos in captivity. They were restoring patches of longleaf pine forest and protecting gopher tortoise populations. What looked like an impulsive, crazy idea to the public was actually one of the most careful, slow, and scientifically backed restoration projects ever attempted. But that doesn't mean the wild theories are wrong. What if this is the mongoose scenario? What if we're releasing a new apex predator into a system that is already completely broken? What will the indigos eat after they eat the pythons, if they even can? What if they become the new plague? Scientists swear they've done the research, but here's the deal. That's what they said in Hawaii, too. The emperor was back. The stage was set for a battle of titans. But the real shock, the real aftermath, was happening somewhere else. The three-way war. While the world was busy laughing at the snake versus snake plan, something else was happening in the swamp. Something nobody expected. Nature, it turns out, was already starting to adapt. This was the other unexpected aftermath. Deep in the Big Cypress National Preserve, researchers were tracking a 13-foot, 52-pound male python they had named Loki. The snake was fitted with a GPS tracker as part of a breeding study. One December morning, they went to check on his location, expecting a routine update. What they found left them speechless. Loki's massive body was sprawled in the grass. His head had been completely chewed off and was hidden under a nearby bed of pine needles. This was a 52-pound apex predator. What in the Everglades could do this? An alligator? A panther? A few days later, a trail camera set up nearby revealed the unbelievable culprit. It was a native bobcat. A bobcat that biologists estimated weighed barely 25 pounds. This discovery stunned everyone. Wildlife experts called it a first. A native bobcat had successfully stalked, dispatched, and eaten an adult Burmese python more than twice its size. For 2 decades, these pythons had been the undisputed monsters, feared by everything. Now suddenly, one of Florida's own had turned the tables. Some experts guessed that a recent cold snap had slowed the python down, making it vulnerable. But that's where the new wild theories begin. What if it wasn't a fluke? What if the native predators are learning? This wasn't an isolated story. Across Florida, more evidence started to pop up. Alligators, the original apex predators of the swamp, were spotted ambushing and consuming smaller pythons. Even the elusive and endangered Florida panther has been documented taking on these invaders. What if the predators are communicating, not in words, but through behavior? What if one bobcat watched another or learned from a failed hunt and is now passing that knowledge down to its young? What if the home team is finally learning the monster's weak spots? One wildlife biologist famously called it a score for the home team. The Everglades were fighting back, but this adaptation is painfully slow. A single bobcat can't undo 2 decades of destruction. For every python taken down by a native predator, thousands more hatch, hidden and safe. The home team was on the scoreboard, but they were still losing the game. And that's what makes the other part of this story so critical. The laughable plan, the return of the emperor. As the longleaf pines were cut down and the tortoises were hunted or displaced, the indigo snake vanished. During the Great Depression, people dug up tortoises for food and would dispatch any snakes they found hiding inside. By 1978, the eastern indigo snake was listed as a threatened species. It was completely wiped out from Alabama and North Florida. So here's the deal. The laughable plan wasn't about adding a new snake, it was about restoring a native apex predator that humans had already wiped out. For decades, a coalition of conservation groups and state agencies had been painstakingly breeding indigos in captivity. They were restoring patches of longleaf pine forest and protecting gopher tortoise populations. What looked like an impulsive, crazy idea to the public was actually one of the most careful, slow, and scientifically backed restoration projects ever attempted. But that doesn't mean the wild theories are wrong. What if this is the mongoose scenario? What if we're releasing a new apex predator into a system that is already completely broken? What will the indigos eat after they eat the pythons, if they even can? What if they become the new plague? Scientists swear they've done the research, but here's the deal. That's what they said in Hawaii too. The emperor was back. The stage was set for a battle of titans. But the real shock, the real aftermath, was happening somewhere else. For years, conservation teams had been releasing their captive-bred eastern indigo snakes into a protected area in North Florida, the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve. This is hundreds of miles north of the main python invasion, but it's the indigo's ancestral home. They tag them, track them, and hope for the best. Then, in the autumn of 2023, something extraordinary happened. Trail cameras at the preserve captured footage that changed everything. The footage showed two wild-born hatchlings of the eastern indigo snake. They were the offspring of the previously released adults. For the first time in nearly half a century, the eastern indigo snake had successfully reproduced in the wild in North Florida. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was revival. When the biologists confirmed that one of the young snakes wasn't tagged, it was proof it meant it was born entirely outside of human help. The indigos weren't just hanging on, they were living, hunting, and raising the next generation in their old habitat. As 2024 and 2025 rolled on, the story got even better. Teams began spotting more of the snakes. A strong 6-foot male was recorded gliding confidently through the scrub. 19 other snakes from earlier release years were identified, still thriving. The heart of this recovery is the land itself. The slow, hard work of restoring the longleaf pine ecosystem and protecting the gopher tortoise burrows had paid off. The ecosystem wasn't just being restored, it was beginning to function again. So here's the thing. Let's talk down to earth as you're wondering if this is all true. Does this mean the indigos are going to eat all the pythons? Does this solve the problem? No, of course not. The indigos are being released in North Florida. The python stronghold is hundreds of miles south in the Everglades. They aren't even in the same arena yet. But that's not the point. The real unexpected aftermath, the one nobody saw coming, is twofold. First, that nature itself is adapting. The bobcats and alligators are learning. Second, that a conservation plan built on patience, science, and trusting nature's own balance actually worked. For decades, the story of the Everglades was a story of human failure. We failed to keep the snakes contained. We failed to remove them. We looked for a high-tech silver bullet solution and it blew up in our faces. But the real solution, the one that's finally giving a glimmer of hope, wasn't a robot or a drone. It was a native snake. It was the slow, hard work of restoring the land and bringing back the king. The pythons are still a crisis. The lungworm is still a plague. But footage from Florida's swamps finally revealed an aftermath nobody expected. Resilience, hope. But this is where the final wild theory leaves us. What happens next? What happens when the eastern indigo's territory, which is spreading south, finally collides with the python's territory, which is spreading north? And more importantly, what happens when the lungworm meets the emperor? What if this new plague, which is also spreading north, infects the new restored indigo snakes? Are we just restoring a native species only to feed it to an invisible monster? The real aftermath isn't an ending. It's the start of a new three-way war: the python, the parasite, and the emperor. Are we witnessing a recovery or just the next phase of the apocalypse? Let us know your theory below and don't forget to like and subscribe.